I guess I'll introduce the esteemed panelists here, but you know most of them all already, right? We got Remy here from Brighton, the coolest town in England. Runs Full Frontal, has left Logic there in Brighton. Talks about why you should never use jQuery. We got Matt here, knows a thing or two about responsive images, Filament Group. He's from Boston, the coolest town in the US. Jake, you just saw. Jake has agreed to do the entire panel in his Gollum voice. Thank you for that, Jake. And someone you probably don't know yet is Dan over here. Dan works at Telefonica, who are sponsors, so that's why he's on the panel. No, he is not wearing his Telefonica hat today. He's wearing his W3C hat, which is an important and powerful hat to be worn. Now, just to clear a few things up, because maybe some people weren't actually looking at the schedule. In previous years, what we've had as a panel has been the browser panel, right? Who's been to Mobilism before? All right, yeah, quite a few. So you saw the browser panels we've had in previous years. This isn't the browser panel, although we might get some Firefox OS stuff out of Dan, and we might get some Google Chrome stuff out of Jake, because he works at Google now. But that's not what the panel is about. I think over the last 2 years, we managed to squeeze as much as we possibly could out of those browser people. And they're all media trained anyway, so you're not going to get anything useful out of them. No, this is a hot topics panel. The point here is to discuss topics what are hot. So I asked in my blog last week if anyone had questions. Thank you to the 3 people who left comments there. On Twitter today, I said, hey, who's got questions? Thank you for the people who left questions there. Like Remy, before he realized he was actually going to be on the panel. Thank you, Remy. Look forward to throwing those questions right back at you. In fact, thinking about last year's panel and the year before, we have a browser panel, and you want to have representatives from all the browser makers, right? Who never shows up? Apple, right? It's not that they aren't invited. PPK invites Apple every year, and probably invited them this year as well, but they never show up. And then we go, oh, that's Apple. That's just the way they are, a cute little Apple. You're cool with that, Remy, right?
Yeah, no, that's bullshit.
All right.
Apple should be here. It's not acceptable that we just go, yeah, that's fine. They're Apple. We're used to them doing that. And my point with Jeremy last year was Darren Feibel, Gruber.
John Gruber.
Yeah, John Gruber. So he was given like a private viewing of, I think it was Lion, the operating system, and he got to try it out, and the article talks about it a little bit, but he ends with, why are you showing me the operating system? Normally Apple are really secretive about things. And Steve Jobs had passed away by this point, and it's Tim Cook, right? Tim Cook responds with, we're doing things differently now. And Apple, have always not turned up, but they are doing things differently now. They need to engage with us and talk to us, and they have DevRels, but they're not DevRels. They're not the same kind of DevRels that we have with Firefox and with Chrome and so on. And we, as a community, need to push them and go on at them to engage us. Basically, it drives me up the fucking wall. So.
Yeah, I thought that Remy had a very good point. I ended up blogging about this and saying it's not good enough, and we should be creating a stink, because that's what I tend to do when I want something done, is bitch and moan about it on my blog. And that's how I found out they even had a DevRel. I didn't even know they had a DevRel, but she hadn't spoken at any event apart from WWDC, which is kind of crazy. Anecdotally, though, I have to say, my contact within Apple on the Safari team, they do pay attention. I know that. Because we were getting drunk together, and he asked me, if you could fix any bug in Safari, what would it be? And I told him, and he said, okay, blog about that, because they do pay attention. So blog about it. They theoretically listen to this stuff. I mean, do you guys listen? Do you pay attention to what us peons are saying?
Depends who's saying it.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm kidding. I think it's especially important for them to be representing themselves at these kind of events now more than ever, because they are WebKit now, right? I mean, there's fewer and fewer companies now adding stuff to that. I know that Adobe still are, BlackBerry still are, but they're kind of the face of WebKit now, whereas it's been Chrome for a long time, the Google guys. So yeah, I'd like to see them here sort of as a browser vendor that they're.
It does. It always has seemed like a weird mix that you got Apple, one of the most closed cultures when it comes to technology cultures, and you got WebKit, an open source project. It's always felt like a weird mishmash, a weird balance.
Just to say, and by the way, I'm not wearing my W3C hat. I'm wearing my W3C scarf, right?
Okay,
just
very
so
nice.
Yeah, okay. But in the web standards community, they are really active, right? So you see Apple people, you encounter Apple people a lot. In fact, Dave Singer, who's their advisory committee representative, is very active in the kind of governance of W3C and web standards and stuff like that. So they're certainly playing a strong role in that community as well.
Yeah, no. I tend to think of them more as WebKit people when they're, writing emails to the HTML listers. And for some reason, I don't think of them as Apple people. But so I mean, Jake jokingly said that they pay attention depending on who's speaking. But wasn't that much of a joke when you had an interaction with the WhatWG?
I wouldn't say that's strictly humor in my experience.
So do you want to give the full story here? I mean, you kind of did earlier on, but. Here's what I'm interested in.
I can be less diplomatically correct now that we're just chatting.
Here's what I'm interested in, because we got down here from the W3C, and I'll put my hand up and say, historically, the way I've thought about the W3C is slow, right? Everything takes ages, and getting consensus, it's a long process, and frankly, kind of closed off to the needs of developers. Whereas WhatWG, blazingly fast, things get done really quick.
You just show up and
you're now part of the WhatWG. So my perception of WhatWG was that's where stuff gets done. Now you went to the WhatWG first.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's the way I've started thinking of it is the what working group is more the bug fix branch of the spec. They move very, very quick. You go in and say, I notice there's a problem with X, and they're apt to go and come up with some solution and commit that to their version of the HTML spec. The W3C spec is more plodding along with new features that take months and months to hash out, and you have to get sign off from every involved party and blah blah patents that I don't understand. But because of that, it's like any of us working on a bug fix branch, where leave us alone and let us do our job kind of applies.
That's the impression you got when you shut.
So
whereas somebody from Apple comes along with the same problem was trying to be solved, responsive
right. Well,
images.
I mean, Apple signs paychecks too, and I'm just some kid.
Okay, but it appeared from the outside like there was a different treatment because of who was saying it. You're just,
oh yeah, for sure.
You're just nobody from
right.
the Filament Group.
Right. I mean, in fairness.
Whereas, Ted from Apple comes along and it's like, oh, Apple have a solution.
Yeah, they know who he is, they've seen him around, they know who he works for, and it's like, yeah, I mean, sure, you're in.
So then you did go to the W3C.
We did.
And
it's been some time that we've been working on this. And again, it's a new feature. We're lobbying for a brand new crazy DOM thing that nobody's thought of. So it takes a lot of sign-off from a lot of involved parties.
But has your reception been better?
It's been not negative, which is something. But there also wasn't really a process at the W3C for like a bunch of ragtag developers show up and want to get stuff done. Like they had just rolled out the community groups around that time, and that's where. Even then, they were new enough that people were like, community group?
Right. Yeah. So I was actually one of the people that pushed W3C to implement the community groups, right? Because my perception was,
I'll curse you out after the thing.
But my perception, W3C had this thing called incubator groups, which were kind of like, okay, we want to do something quickly, but you still need to be a W3C member to be in them. Or an invited expert, and the whole invited expert process was very opaque, and nobody knew how to become an invited expert, and and all this stuff. So there was a lot of accusation of elitism, and then there was a lot of what I called community standards that were just like cropping up on Google group lists and mailing lists, and just people wanted to get stuff done, right? And so my perception was W3C should be doing something to support that kind of community-driven effort. Hence, we ended up, as we had to come to consensus, of course, because everything is consensus driven. But what we ended up with, I think, is a pretty good approach, and it's great to hear that you're using it, and I hope that it is working.
So you decided to call them community groups, not bike sheds.
Yes, but I think where there still needs to be some work is how do you merge that back into the mainstream, right? So
Yeah, that's where we ran into a lot of rough edges, because it was like, okay, now that you've reached this point in whatever it was we were talking about, go and post it to list X. And then it's like, well, we got 20 people want to talk about this from the community group, and only one of us ponied up, only one of us is technically a member and can participate, and they have to just send out links to the archives whenever that comes up. And it's getting refined over time. But
So not to get too much into W3C process here, but I mean, another approach then is to run a session at a TPAC. Now TPACs only happen once a year, right? So that is a blocker there. But I mean, if the timing is good, that can be a good way to get people behind your
But
project as well.
let's be realistic here. The end decision of whether something gets in a spec or not is whether it's in a browser or not. And so, I mean, if W3C put it in the spec and browsers implement it, it will end up in the WhatWG spec, not because they think it's a good idea, but
it'll get
because
merged back because that's how
it's
it is.
in browsers.
I mean,
So
I've seen plenty of emails on that list that are like, I don't like this, but okay.
Yeah, exactly.
That's just how it works.
if it's in a browser, it's got to go in the spec.
I
'cause
read
that's-
them all in that voice, too.
Yeah, I read them in the comic book guy from The Simpsons voice.
Yeah, I can see that.
So, which brings up the question how browsers decide what they, because it's not, I think there's this misunderstanding about how standards work a lot of the time with browsers, that the W3C are there working on the stuff, and then they emerge with the spec and say, it's ready, go forth and implement.
We've written the rules.
Yeah, here's the rules, here's the instruction manual, go and do it, which is not at all how it actually works in practice, or very rarely, I would say. And in fact, it's much more like the other way around, where the standards group are documenting what already exists in browsers, like XML HTTP requests, plenty of other, proprietary stuff that became standards. So, Jake, with Chrome, obviously you can look to existing specs and say, well, that's partly our roadmap, the standards that exist, but you're going to also put in stuff that isn't yet in a standard, but will be because you're doing it, and therefore it'll become a standard.
Well, I think we got bitten by that with the whole vendor prefix stuff, right? And so there's a complete move away from that. I mean, we will still just throw stuff in the browser to give it a try, but that will only ever be in Canary, and it will only ever be behind a flag. But most of the time, that will still start with a specification. I mean, I know what we're doing with the app cache at the moment. Well, they're trying to come up with a new version of that. I mean, that's all been drawn up first. So we're working on an open GitHub account, sort of actually specking out the behavior, and we're describing it using JavaScript because we sort of don't feel that IDL has been the most effective way of doing this stuff, and we want to show people an actual JavaScript API. And now then we've got one of the engineers who's experimenting with some of the low-level features, like putting them in a browser to just prove out that it's actually possible.
Now, you mentioned vendor prefixes, and I'm glad you did. They were an enormously hot topic last year because Opera had just announced that it was going to be parsing WebKit rules. Mozilla were talking about it. Don't think they ever did actually get around to it. And I have to remind everyone that last year I did at one point say to Andreas Bovens from Opera, if you love WebKit so much, why don't you marry it? And I thought I was making a cheap joke, but apparently I was foretelling the future. But the whole vendor prefixes as a thing, as a way of getting stuff done, my impression was the jury was still out on whether it was a good or bad thing. A lot of people will defend them and say it's the only way we can get to play with stuff without having to go through the whole standards process and everything before we can actually use this stuff. But was the problem abuse? Abuse of how vendor prefixes have been used? The whole Dash WebKit and nothing else?
No, because I think it was a problem for not just the WebKit prefix, but all of them, right? I mean, and so the advice that we were giving people, like on stage as developers, we were saying, yeah, make sure you always include the one without the prefix at the end. But that was problematic in itself. That caused a problem with the gradient syntax. That's now why in the proper gradient syntax, you now have to say to bottom rather than just bottom, because they inverted what it meant because they made a mistake the first time round.
I guess what I'm getting at here is did we take it too lightly, vendor prefixes? We're like, oh, here's a cool thing. It's a bit more typing, but our preprocessor will take care of it. Whereas actually, we probably should have had to sign something every time we used a vendor prefix, saying, I will revisit this CSS, and I will remove this when it is no longer needed.
I think Blink. The plan with Blink is you've got to turn on the experimental feature.
Yeah.
Like all of them are going to be underneath that. And the thing is, if you put a cool toy in the corner and say you only get to play with that for demos, so you don't get to like fuck that. I want that cool toy in my thing. I'm gonna.
Yep. So the idea
if they're
is
there in the first place, we're going to use it.
So make noises about if there's something there that you really want quicker. If you make noises about it, then we can get it through the spec quicker. I mean, because this won't succeed in just dropping the prefixes.
That applies to some browsers. Doesn't apply to people like Apple. Like some of the
Apple are going to use prefixes still.
Yeah.
But you can see the value that Remy's get. We get to have our cake and eat it too with prefixes. We get to try stuff out on the web, in the same browser that our customers have. By using these magical prefixes, and we abuse them. I mean, because I think it's our fault that the prefixes didn't work out. Because we didn't take them seriously enough. We just took them as some more typing to be done. But you can see how switching a config flag or something so that only developers get to see the stuff. That's not the same. It's really not.
No, well, it's not going to provide the same amount of testing, but it's so this is what we're trying to. We're going to do to avoid the problem of this stuff just living on the web forever. Because there's some prefixes that, so Blink it supports all of the current WebKit prefixes, and we're going to have a hard time turning those off, because we did kind of ruin the web with them, right? So the idea is that, with the flag thing, that that problem's gone with the flag thing. Yes, it creates a new problem about testing, so it's up to the guys doing the specifications, and developers should be going and playing with this stuff, because then we can get it quicker through the specifications. Because look at transitions. They shouldn't be prefixed. Like, they shouldn't have been prefixed for how many years, because it's not that complicated compared to some of the other stuff.
Okay, but you look at stuff where the syntax changed, and if it weren't for prefixes, we wouldn't have been able to have the two different syntaxes in the same style sheet.
And I know on jQuery Mobile, transitions sucked in a lot of places because we're covering such a crazy range of devices and browsers. So a lot of times we'd intentionally omit a prefix. Like, we omitted an opera prefix for something on purpose, despite it being supported, because it was terrible. It was a worse experience. So I kind of saw don't throw anything, I kind of saw value in vendor prefixes. For that reason.
Well, it puts pressure on the browser to actually fix this stuff quicker, right?
Right. I'd rather have something explode in my face in some catastrophic way, like the phone just melts on my desk, and then I'm like, that is an issue, because otherwise it's going to be like, I got to remember to check border radiuses, flip that on.
It's going to be one flag, by the way.
Just the everything breaks flag.
Yeah,
I'm into that actually.
Because it's in Canary, so Canary is the everything breaks browser, or, possibly. I know that I was talking to some people this morning saying, today Canary is quite crashy. I was like, well, yeah, it's the experimental browser.
I'm into that in a weird way. I get it.
I get your point that this should propel the standards process faster, because stuff's that's how we'll have to get stuff done. But I'm not sure a faster process is necessarily a better process. Because stuff, as you say, you have to live with stuff for years when something when something is properly in a browser. So if the process is fast and not careful enough, I'm conflicted. I'm conflicted about prefixes, whether they were a good idea or not, and I'm conflicted about the alternatives to prefixes.
Well, and what we've decided to do, what Firefox has decided to do, because it's pretty much the same thing. It's not like we're not religiously devoted to this new thing. If we do it and it turns out to be a bad idea, we'll go do something else. And I'm kind of worried about sort of the browsers that are sort of doing prefixes, and I think this is just paranoia on my part, but they might have a benefit to putting stuff, obviously prefixes in main browser, and then stalling the standards process, because then Chrome and Firefox can't have that feature, and they would.
Conspiracy. Yeah. I mean, I say I'm not sure about vendor prefixes, but when I started to see them creep into JavaScript, I thought, okay, no, enough is enough. We do not need vendor prefixed properties on memory.
Consistent prefixes in JavaScript. Yeah.
But we can fix all of the big thing. For me, prefixes in JavaScript are completely hidden away. Like, the prefix on RAF, on request animation frame, there's a polyfill that just hides that away, and I don't code a prefix in JavaScript ever. Okay, that's not recorded, is it? No, but the point is it's hidden. We can fix it, but in CSS there's no way of fixing it. You code it, and if you leave it in there and you forget or you screw it up, then you're screwed.
Okay,
whereas JavaScript, you should be working to like polyfill those little things, the small ones.
Glad you mentioned this idea. Just polyfill it. And you did say in your talk, you caveated that if you're throwing polyfills at everything, you're doing something wrong. But just fix it. Just add this polyfill. Just add this one bit of code. Just add the Financial Times quick touch. Death by 1,000 cuts. I think. I mean, you were talking about when it's okay not to use jQuery, and I'm like, hell yeah. You should have to justify everything. I think the cumulative effect of things like jQuery, HTML5 boilerplate, reset style sheet, even Google Analytics. If you're not actually going to look at the damn analytics, don't put in that script. I know it's small, but all these things add up, right? You know what I mean? So, yeah, I mean, do you think everything should be justified, or is it okay to just have your toolkit of stuff you throw in without even thinking about it, so that you don't have to write a prefix?
For me, there's two types of projects. There's one where I know that it's starting on mobile and going upwards, and there's the type of project which is just a big website like Shopfront that I know their primary audience or what they want is the website on the desktop, and they don't really care about the mobile thing. What I'm trying to say is some projects I just like chuck the whole lot in, but the recent thing I did for the Google I/O little project, I start from scratch and I choose what I need. Each little bit needs to kind of justify its way in there, but you need to use your common sense. Like if I'm talking about using a polyfill for request animation frame, if I don't, I'm hand coding each of those kind of this big if else clause, and that's probably just as much code in the first place. I mean, I have to have a build process, so it's one HTTP request, but the small projects, yeah, I try and kind of justify everything, but I know that I want interactivity. I'm not, we were maybe kind of extreme discussion where if, maybe you can't justify having that style there. Maybe it should all just be kind of black and white. And can you really justify the JavaScript? Do you really need to have that menu tucked away with a transition? I think, yeah, it's just a lot of common sense there.
Yeah, Rachel Andrew wrote a good blog post about this recently. Stop solving problems you don't yet have. Basically, don't chuck this stuff in by default, but wait until you need it, and then add whatever your boilerplate polyfills are. But I mean, Matt, do you get the point I'm getting from a philosophical perspective? I guess that's saying, here's a polyfill for something. It's a solution. I won't argue with that, but it's not a good solution. It's an acceptable solution.
I've seen plenty of those. Yeah, absolutely.
Ideally, whatever you're polyfilling, you're only doing it because you shouldn't have to. It should be in the browser.
Yeah,
like picture.
I'm bitter now. I used to be less so. But at Filament, like I said earlier in the talk, we're crazy people. So if there's like a thing we can fix, we're totally going to fix that because we can. So a couple of the ones we ran into previously were the iOS orientation change bug. Yes. Where, if you don't disable zoom, you switch and it like zooms you in, which is nothing. You just zoom back out. Every website suffered from this issue. It's a browser issue. Me and Scott came up with a polyfill that was like out of its mind. It listened to the accelerometer, and once you moved the phone to a certain point, or it was like just prior to changing the orientation, it would disable zoom, and then the minute it changed over and went past a certain point, it would re-enable it. So it would keep it from zooming in. And we used this for a while, and it was like, this is awesome. We made an awesome thing. Literally no one expects this to work. Like, we dropped in this crazy, like it's tapping into the battery on the phone in a big way, and it's kicking in like the GPS, and it's a really cool fix, but this is a waste of everything.
I actually had to say, I was trying to tackle the same bug from a different direction, and I felt dirty the whole time I was doing it, because this shouldn't be my job. This is a problem with Safari, with mobile Safari.
It's a funny story. I was talking to an Apple guy that I actually convinced to communicate with a developer. I had to ply him with beer. And he said, I brought up that orientation change bug, like staring daggers, and it was right after it was fixed. And he said something like, "Oh yeah, we didn't really prioritize that in a big way because we saw your fix." And I was like,
You see what I said? You see what I said about them paying attention?
right.
And by the way, when I got the guy drunk in the bar, that was the bug I told him. I told him that's the one, and that's the blog post I wrote.
The thing is, right, if you're writing a polyfill that you know has some insane amount of work on the device, then you don't want to be using it. That's the bottom line.
Yeah.
If it's costing like performance, battery, just to get a thing to work, but there are polyfills for the shallow DOM. Right, that hasn't even landed completely, but it means that you can start kind of componentizing your code. That's a word as well.
Yeah, I'm big into polyfills. Like, get a feel for this, figure out what's going to break. That's how picture fill came about. It was like, we're writing the spec. Let's just screw around with it in JavaScript and see
Okay,
how
let me put it this way.
might
I'm
work.
worried about developers treating polyfills the same way they treated vendor prefixes. Vendor prefixes were experimental. They were not meant as a permanent solution, and developers just treated them like it was more typing.
And the idea of the true sense of a polyfill is it fills out something that is solid in the first place.
Exactly. It
And
shouldn't be needed.
Everything else is really just a JavaScript library. But if there had been a polyfill for the web intents, in fact there was a polyfill for web intents, and if that sticks around, it's not a polyfill, but it doesn't matter what the name is. It's just a JavaScript library that allows you to have this intent thing.
That's where I'm like, yeah, picture fill's technically a polyfill, but maybe don't do that one yet, because again, it's going to change at some point, I'm sure.
Yeah, I mean, the idea is it should eventually be replaced by the standard.
Right, then it becomes a polyfill based on what the native one is actually like.
Which, by the way, the word polyfill, that's Remy's. Remy came up with that term.
Yeah,
Invented that.
but I was saying to someone earlier on, it was just all I did was put a name on something we were doing. But
I know. I was thinking. I think I can point to the first big polyfill. Do you remember Dean Edwards' IE7 script? This was before IE7 actually existed, and it would make IE6 obey more CSS. And looking back now, it was a polyfill because what it did was made it. You didn't have to write in a new idiom. You just wrote your CSS like normal. That's the classic.
Yeah. That's exactly what I intended with that idea of what a polyfill should be. That it just takes away, makes it feel like the way it should be, basically.
So I got to say, Jake,
Polyfill
I
is
think that's
British
how
spec
stuff is going to get experimented with and
Yeah.
stuff, rather than we're going to be using Canary to try stuff out and then lobby the standards bodies.
Is there? Because we're saying so we can do a polyfill for experimentation stuff. I know that's what we're going to do with the app cache stuff. We're building sort of the polyfills so we can actually play with that now. And then when the polyfill will be there to make up for stuff that isn't in the browser, then stuff will move into the browser in Canary. I think both will happen. I agree that if there's a solution in the main version of browsers, that becomes an excuse for spec authors, browser vendors to treat it as a solved problem. And that's what I think has happened with a lot of the vendor prefix stuff. They're like, well, developers have got it now. And it's got that little thing at the start that says, we've made a half-assed job of this, so don't shoot. It's your problem. It's your problem if it fails. Not our problem. So we need to get away from that.
One of the good examples of innovation happening, the way innovation happens, I think, in the web, in the browsing community, was Google Gears. Actually, do people remember Google Gears? I don't know. Yeah. I think there's a real good success story about Google Gears. Came out. They had part of the features. A feature set of Google Gears was a location API. Andre, who was the author of that API. Shopped it around and said, where can we standardize this? We created a W3C group. It was a targeted group, not a community group, a regular working group, produced a single specification, which was the geolocation API. There was a lot of additional work that went into it, I think, and we had Mozilla involved, we had Opera involved. And
it was all rainbows and unicorns and peace and love.
Well, it was to a certain extent because we saw it. The first commercial implementation was on iOS, on iPhone, and then at least on a mobile browser. Sorry, and then now we have location on the web, right? And I think that's an amazing story that we should be looking to replicate when we're talking about some of these new features that people are talking about, especially on the mobile web, like access to your calendar or to the accelerometer or to other kinds of device features and device capabilities and stuff like that. And I bemoan a little bit the fact that we haven't managed to have as straightforward a story for some of these other capabilities as for Geo.
It's fair to say the
And
process.
cache too, yeah.
Which is a less amazing story.
Well, yeah.
The processes generally are messy. And standards are messy. The way, it's like the sausage thing, right? You love to eat them, but you don't want to see how they're made.
It has to go a lot faster, though. I remember, you think how long ago Google Gears came out, and now we're at the point where we can say, yeah, we can. If we've got a client that says we want geolocation in our app, we say, yeah, we can get it, and we defer down to not being there. But it's
to be fair. I mean, the web is held to a higher standard than other platforms because of its size and its reach. So security implications are really important.
I'm not saying go faster at the cost of anything. I just mean go faster.
Got it. I mean, so like I said, this is the third year we're having a panel at the end of Mobilism, and previous years it's been browser makers, and the recurring theme for 2 years was about device APIs. When will we get the same access to the address book or the camera that these native apps have had for years? Which is fair enough. Faster, we want faster. But, there are security implications, like as we saw from Path, a native app that had access to the address book and completely abused it. Now you want to give the whole web the same potential for abuse. I mean, is that fair to say that security has got to be a big consideration?
Yeah, I mean, yes, and then the privacy issues, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to. So there's a tension. So but on Firefox OS, for instance, there's a tension there between opening up some of these APIs in a very web-like way so that anybody can use them versus, okay, actually this API needs to be a privileged API because I don't want to allow users to visit a random page and then suddenly their phone starts making premium rate SMS messages to Estonia, right? Which is something that happens. That's a kind of malware that you see a lot on mobile, actually, and we don't want to enable malware. We want to, if anything, we want the web environment on the phone to be seen as higher level of security and privacy and trustability than in the same way that the web is seen as that way on desktop. Right?
Permission granting is broken at the moment, right? I mean, 'cause we've got the two models. We've got the web one, which is, if you were going to build like a sort of a large site which used a lot of bits of hardware that require their own permission, you're ending up with the user clicking allow for a lot of stuff. But then the other model is showing like one dialogue with all the things in that people don't read and just click yes, which is what happens on phones. So we need to come up with a better solution for that. And
this is why on Firefox OS you have certain APIs which are privileged APIs, which the app needs to go through a vetting process currently being run by Mozilla. So it's actually mirroring some of the same.
But is that really the best way to go? It's like do what the app stores are doing? Because as I said, in the case of Path, it didn't exactly work out that well. And is that the limit of our imagination, that we just want to copy what app stores do? I mean, so when I opened up the blog post about questions for this panel, I did have a question from Stuart Langridge, which is, why do we want installable apps? And I know you work on the working group for bundling web stuff into an installable bundle. But why? What is the benefit of trying to imitate the limited shelf life of an app store on something as wide and open as the web? What are the benefits?
So I had this argument with Andre Popescu, who was the Geo API author, actually, because we argued about this. I was trying to get him on side with helping us build a widget spec in W3C. This is the famous W3C widget spec that nobody ended up liking. But so Andre said to me, you don't need widgets, you don't need packaging. AppCache can do it all, right? And at the time, I think I said, well, you don't need a lot of things, but I mean, maybe in some cases, it makes more sense for an application to be packaged up and installed onto a device, especially if you're talking about devices where you want to have some you want to know that all of the assets of a certain application are there, right? Are installed, and it's done. You don't have to go up to the network to get anything. It's all been packaged up and installed.
So it's
right
about
there for you.
offline.
Yes, right.
Okay,
So things like on Firefox OS, the dialer application, right? You don't want to find out when you're trying to dial the phone that suddenly you need to get a GPRS or a Edge connection or whatever, 3G to download some aspect of it.
Offline is being solved in other ways where we don't have to throw away URLs, which is what you're doing when you package stuff up to be just like a native app. Is like, well, we're getting rid of the whole web thing.
Well, what I hope we can do in this process is to come up with something that's better and that's more webby as a way to package these applications, these web applications up, because they have to be web applications that use some mechanism like intents, or there's an activity called web activities, which is also in progress, where you can allow the browser to make a decision about, okay, well, I want to handle this URI. Oh, I know that there's already an application or a web application installed that should be able to handle this URI. I'll hand that off to that application.
Why can't that URL just deliver that application? I mean, because this is how the web works now, and we have some ways to make it work offline already. We're going to get better ways.
This is something you care about in particular, I think. Right?
Yeah. Because we've been working on the navigation controller, which is going to be hopefully the way we do offline in the future. But yeah, I mean, in that instance, you will go to a page, it will cache the assets it needs offline. It will have control over individual caches that can update at different points. And then later on, when you're offline, you visit that URL and it works. Your online experience will become the same as your offline experience.
Yeah. Well,
the thing is, isn't this one of these? I mean, for me, it's technically it's all possible. We can do all of it. It's you can do it all in the browser. The thing is, the user likes to stick double-clicking icons, and they like putting their apps on their home screens.
Right, well,
for me, that's actually enough reason that I want to have an installable app, that warm fuzzy feeling, and discoverability actually on the device or on my desktop, being able to double click.
That I get as an addition. It's a web thing, which means it lives at a URL first and foremost, and that we give the option that you get to put it on your phone as something that stands.
But
the
offline, it's all technically possible, but I think I want to see installable apps just to be able to have it on the desktop.
Well, that's just making a bookmark, right? I mean, if we make that easier.
That exists, and users don't do that. They don't put bookmarks on the desktop.
You mean like putting a bookmark on the home page?
Yeah. Putting a link to something on.
So
on the home screen.
a la Financial Times on the iPad, right? Which I think is one of the best examples of. But that is. I do think users want that kind of experience, and there's a whole emotive aspect to when you get a game, right? When you get cut the rope or something like that, you have it, you purchase it maybe, or you download it and it's there, but how? I think that the challenge that we have, and I don't think I have a very good. I don't have an answer for this, but I know that we need to work it out this year. I think this is going to be the big. Question is, how do we reinvent packaging in a way that makes it sufficiently webby to still be the web? Right?
I still don't think we need packaging. I mean, we have. Well, why invent another thing? Because you're going to have a website, and then you're going to have a packaged version of that. Why not just have the website?
But why do Chrome apps need packaging then? Why do Chrome apps package?
I would prefer. So part of the packaging thing is there for extended permissioning, but I would rather see a world where we didn't need that.
I got to say, you know what this reminds me of? We started off today with Derek Featherstone, with the looming head of John Alsop, reminding us all of A Tao of Web Design, a fantastic article. Who's read A Tao of Web Design by John Alsop? That's depressing. That's really depressing. You should all read A Tao of Web Design by John Alsop. It was written 13 years ago and 1 month ago, and it's amazing. It's incredibly prescient. And what he was basically saying in the article was that we need to accept the web as its own medium and not be trying to reinvent it as a print, because that's what we're used to. And you know what this feels like? It feels like we're trying to just make the web more like the App Store, more like native stuff, rather than accept the web for this amazing thing that it is that's way more powerful than any app store.
Yeah, that's kind of what I've been thinking, like this whole conversation. I've been sitting here going, I don't know that we need to compete in the first place. I mean, anything we do to make a website more like an app is going to be just like putting a layer of shellac over the top of a website that is designed to be a website, and it's made to do what it does. And we're going to like kludge something together, like no matter how elegant the solution is. Most websites aren't designed to be used the same way as like native apps. So I mean, we could have a ton of APIs. It could get really.
We
clunky.
should probably leave this. We should probably leave this because we could go on. We're bike shedding now.
I just want to add. I don't think it's about trying to replicate apps in the web environment. I think that's the wrong approach, right? It's got to be about learning from some of the success in terms of the user adoption that apps have had, right? And understanding what has made that a successful
but not
medium.
at the expense of what makes the web so
No,
awesome.
Exactly. But
like URLs.
reinvent. Yes, it has to all be based around URLs. It has to be webby.
Okay. One last thing about browsers, I guess, before we move on. It's a hot topics panel, Jake. I've got to bring it up, but the move to Blink is obviously a big deal. The timing was really interesting, because it was 1 week beforehand or 2 weeks beforehand that Opera announced that they were dropping Presto, and they were moving to WebKit, and the internet was outraged, obviously, or portions of it were outraged, as the internet is wont to be, by saying it was really bad because it lessened diversity. Now we had way too many browser vendors using WebKit as an engine. Now 2 weeks later, Google announces we're dropping WebKit. We're moving to this new thing called Blink, which is forked off WebKit. It seemed like the same people were equally outraged. It was weird.
Yeah, I heard some good conspiracy theories about that. Actually, there was some people suggesting that Opera and Google had colluded together to do that in a specific way for some gain, and I it was just the kind of big secret, the first big secret that I had to keep as a Google employee, because I remember that there was discussions internally sort of rumbling about should we do this, and I was like, well, that's really interesting, and I was like, yeah, this discussion happens like every few months, don't worry about it. And then it was like the next day I came in and went, we think it's actually happening now, I think we're going to do this. And then Paul Irish just sort of turned around at his desk and went, yo, bro, for sure. So I heard this thing that the Opera are going to use WebKit, and we were like, fuck.
That's dead on impression, just.
We were all really worried because we thought it would look like we were screwing Opera over. Like, if Opera are coming,
I don't want to be a member of any club that Opera's a member of.
If they're coming in the hot tub, we're leaving the hot tub. But it actually turned out to be, it kind of turned out to be a good thing, but we were really nervous about it. It didn't look, at first thought, we thought it was going to look
But
really
it did
bad.
kind of end up restoring balance to the force, right? Because the diversity concern is a real concern. We remember the browser wars, man. You weren't there, man. And it was lack of diversity was kind of what led to it, the monoculture of IE. So I totally understood why people were freaking out when Opera said they were moving to WebKit. So it did feel like the move to Blink felt like a good thing in balance. Is everyone diversity good?
I don't know. Check your
I get
midichlorians, man,
Yeah.
because
You
The whole thing creeps me out.
really?
Yeah. I mean, WebKit, granted, you lost diversity when a bunch of browsers are all on WebKit. WebKit had a ton of contributors. A bunch of people are kicking into WebKit, and if they're going to fight it out amongst themselves, they all have their own respective interests for what goes in a WebKit. Opera kind of decides they're going to do what Chrome's doing. Chrome makes a strictly political move. I mean, all they did was fork WebKit and say, all right, this is our playground. You stay on your side. We're going to keep ours. And now they can kind of just decide what goes into that fork of WebKit. And then Opera's like, us too? And I don't know. It seems like everybody's still on WebKit, but now we have what we say goes WebKit in two browsers.
Microsoft can just decide what goes into Internet Explorer. Mozilla can just decide what goes into Firefox. I mean, this is not and we're doing everything in the open. I mean, this is why, like, people were saying, oh, when do we get hold of Blink? Then what, and we're like, well, it's there now, because we really did. There was we all had like a big hangout ready for the announcement to launch, and it was as soon as we launched the document, we pressed a button, and it did the fork copied onto a server, and we were like, "Yay! It's the same as WebKit."
Balloons dropped
we
from the
wanted.
ceiling, nothing happened.
Yeah, exactly. It was a bit of an anticlimax because we wanted to do everything out in the open rather than squirrel away in secret for ages and then present something.
And so that document that's ultimately published, these are the criteria that these are the hoops we have to jump through if we want to add something to Blink. Is in the open, and I do think it's really important that we collectively hold you to that. And
Yes, definitely.
That if we catch you, violating your own principles, that we should call you on it.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because it was something that I wrote about this as well, but I was kind of worried about that. It's like, is this just going to mean that we're going to throw loads of stuff in? So I know I'm internally going to hold them accountable for that, and so is everyone in Google, because it is a collective worry. There was some sort of some criticism about that, but I've never seen people as critical of Google's actions as Googlers. Some of the vitriol internally. So if anything gets past that internal stuff, then something's gone wrong.
Okay. Well, we're going to keep you on your toes. I've got a few questions I need to kind of try and run through. People who were nice enough to contribute questions. Some of them are for specific people. Matt, for you, about responsive images, actually. And this is a question, because you know a thing or two about responsive images.
I'm starting to think I'm getting pigeonholed a little bit here.
No, but Anna actually had a question, which is about responsive images for large screens, but with low bandwidth and low memory, like TVs, for example. Well, what do we do?
We put a lot of thought into this and had a lot of arguments about this, and a lot of very strong opinions came forward in the responsive images community group. Me personally, I don't think we can do a hell of a lot about that. Good. I don't think we have the tools for it.
So this leads on to another question, and that was a genuine question from Anna, but it leads perfectly to this question I was discussing with Liza the other day, which is about when are problems not our problems? And I would even say that the orientation bug in Mobile Safari was an example of that. It's
not our problem.
We're spending time on it, but we shouldn't be, and we should feel dirty that we do.
Yeah, and it's not to say it's not an important issue. Like the bandwidth large screen thing, that's a serious, I've been tethered half the time I've been around town.
And a number of people,
it's miserable.
A number of people during Derek's presentation, when he was pointing out issues when screen reader behavior clashes with, you doing the right thing.
Yeah.
It's like, is it up to us to fix that? Should we fix that? Is it sending the wrong message if we polyfill everything that clashes?
Well, bandwidth detection is something we've thrown around for a while, and it's something that it seems like, that sounds a good idea, we should have that. But when you explore the problem a bit more, so problem one is we only know what the first hop is. We only know you're on 3G, you're on Wi-Fi. You could be on Wi-Fi to a MiFi, that's roaming, and we can't detect that because all we hear is Wi-Fi. So if you're doing a big download, you get the opportunity to then adapt, which is a good way of doing it, because then you're relying on actual data. But maybe if you've got a full signal, but the site you're going to is suffering problems, so it's actually slow.
Right. Even if you can get it accurate on the browser side, exposing that to us on a page-by-page basis is unbelievably hard to get right.
And also, it's not. I think people. I'm going to sound like one of those sort of terrible browser people that say, I think people will use this wrong, but I genuinely do, because I would use
absolutely.
it wrong. Yeah. And if I was in a hotel and I was on terrible Wi-Fi, someone sent me a video of a cat falling down the stairs, and I was, so I put it on.
Was the cat okay?
It was fine. Well, I don't know actually. I couldn't quite get the whole video because of the Wi-Fi. I assume it's fine, but I put it down to the lowest quality setting, and I'm going to watch this content and get on with my day. But I think it was the next day there was a new Star Trek trailer out, and I was like, well, I'm going to watch that, but I am going to watch that in HD, and I am going to leave the laptop there for an hour if it has to download that trailer. So the bandwidth usage was my decision, and if the website decided, I'm only going to give you this low because you're on a slow connection,
I think that goes back to a lot of what Kenneth was talking about with the whole context thing, is that developers crave that kind of control or decision making, but we're not necessarily the best people to be making those decisions.
For a long time, a bunch of people rallied behind the idea of a bandwidth media query. And up front, I was like, yes, I will only use this for good. And then I realized it was something I want only me to have and no one else. Because someone's boss somewhere is going to be like, you don't understand. Our high-resolution images are important. Yeah. We need them. The user will understand because they've come here on purpose, and our stuff is blah, 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 I sign your paycheck. And some developer is going to end up being like, okay, I don't want that control.
Getting away from the
browser should do that.
nitty-gritty of bandwidth and stuff, I just want to get back to this bigger picture thing of when problems aren't our problem. I'm just concerned, I don't know if you guys feel this way as well, that when we are trying to solve everything that isn't working quite right just now, whether it's through genius polyfills or amazing, hacks, and we did see some great hacks in Max's talk yesterday, are we not going back to kind of the days of the problem of IE6, which was created by us? That problem was created by us because we didn't disabuse clients of the notion that it could look the same in IE6 as it does in the latest Chrome or the latest Firefox. And our job became to make it work in every browser. Where actually, our job should have involved telling people that's not the way it works. Things aren't going to work the same. It's not our job all the time, is it, to try and fix everything and make everything the same?
It's our job to fix some of the things some of the time. Don't fix everything, but take up the mantle if you want the challenge. And it's that, for small companies to do that ridiculous polyfill, it gets you attention. It's actually good for business.
Okay, but I think developers are really hard on themselves sometimes. They feel they go to bed crying because they couldn't fix that thing.
Yeah, we're obsessed with fixing stuff. If we can't fix it, then we're fucked. We can't go to sleep.
Scott kicked the original idea to me at 8 p.m. on a Saturday, and I was like, it's on now. Okay, let's do a ridiculous thing because it's fun. I like fixing stuff.
And those kind of fixes show browsers that there is a hunger for that feature. I mean, the people were asking CSS working groups for variables, for mix-ins, for nesting,
SAS.
and and because the CSS working group you don't need that.
Yeah.
And then SAS came out and everyone went, yeah, we need this. We're going to use this.
Yep.
A query selector all and jQuery. I mean, that's
Yeah.
classic example of we
that's
do
a
want this.
A very big deal. But
Yeah.
I'd say on the whole, I think our tolerance for fixing weird nitpicky stuff is on the decline. I don't know. Maybe it's just me.
Good.
It feels like lately I'm more like...
Maybe it's because of the diversity of devices. And actually, this leads on to another question that Vasilis asked, and this does get back to the bandwidth detection. Is with so many undetectable things, like what's the network connection like, or inputs, right? How do we know what kind of inputs? The general advice that we've heard so far has been to simplify. Like PPK is saying, when in doubt, use a click. Just generally simplify. Is there a danger that we're going to get more boring websites that, through simplification, it's going to just mean? I mean, somebody tweeted that during Sarah's talk that they thought that gov.uk was boring because it
but
looked
not
boring.
if you need your license renewed.
So this is the second part of the question is, or do we need a better definition of what's exciting that goes beyond just the skin deep of what wins awards and actually to really useful. And as a user of gov.uk, I find it really exciting.
Yeah, you got to figure we're mechanics. Somebody drives up in a Volkswagen Golf. We're like, yeah, okay, it's a car. But somebody uses that to get to work, man. This stuff has to serve a purpose. It doesn't all have to be like Lamborghini if you're going the speed limit.
It's also about design aesthetics, though, and that is fashion, right? That's about fashion. It's not about technology, right? And I think...
Sure, but you can see how the unknowns of the web, like not knowing bandwidth, not knowing inputs, kind of have to lead us to playing it safe, to kind of assuming lowest common denominator.
We've seen the multi-megabyte websites. People aren't playing it safe. People are experimenting with this stuff. Sometimes good, sometimes not so good. I think there's every 10 seconds or so, someone walks into a room at an agency and goes, "Hey guys, I've got an idea. When you scroll the page, stuff's going to move at different
It
speeds."
flips upside down.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah, that's what gov.uk needs, parallax scrolling.
Everything needs parallax scrolling.
Somebody on Wednesday was just demonstrating to me an app that they had built for iPad for a content company that had that kind of scrolling. And he asked me, can I do that? This is what my client wants. Can I do this on HTML5, right? And I had to say, well, yeah, I think you can. I don't think you want to, but okay, But
I think I was getting the nod from PPK that we should wrap it up, which is a shame because there's so much more we could talk about. We haven't really talked about responsive web design that much, even.
Video games? We could talk.
We've talked about video games.
Okay.
By the way, I have some copies of Stephen Hayes' book, Responsive
Throw it in the
Design
crowd.
Workflow. So for the people who tweeted questions, if you recognized your question at any point,
First one to get to the stage gets a book.
then you should get a book. But ladies and gentlemen, would you please join me in thanking my panelists, Remy and Matt and Jake and Dan.